Hi, everyone. Welcome back from the break. I hope you've been enjoying the first day of Stream Queens Con 3. This is EXP Queens, the JRPG panel.
Woo!
Woo.
Just a note before we get started as well, don't forget we are raising money for AMFAR today for AIDS research. So the link to donate to that is in the chat. If you can spare some money, that's a really good cause, so help us out today. My name's Crazy Grimshaw. I'll be moderating the discussion tonight, and I'm joined by 4 of the most gorgeous JRPG experts on Twitch. In a moment, I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves, but when you do this, I would like to know 2 things about you as well. What's your favorite JRPG, and what was your first JRPG? So first, we'll go in alphabetical order. Our first panelist today is Twitch's Queen of Illustration. When she's not on a journey to become a Pokemon master, she's flawlessly blending art and photography. It's Caricature.
Hi. So for me, I would say my favorite JRPG is probably Shin Megami Tensei 4. My first JRPG, I guess Pokemon kind of is. Pokemon was like my gateway of like turn-based combat in a game, and that was kind of what sold me on turn-based gameplay in general, and that's what kind of made me fall into JRPGs. But I think I guess if you want to go classic JRPGs, even though nobody knows this game, I would say Witch's Tale for the Nintendo DS is probably the first like real JRPG that I really dove in on. It's so
I know
cute.
that game. Who published that?
NIS.
Yep, there it is.
I have heard of A Witch's Tale. I've never played it, but I remember it was one of the, I had like a real JRPG era in DS time, and that was one of the ones I always looked at. Anyway, thank you, Kara. Our next panelist is who I would say is the sweetest stream queen. With an exciting variety of video games and even more exciting hair colors, this queen is always streaming something that flips my nostalgia switches. She's the world's foremost Chrono Cross expert, Chalora.
Expert? I don't know about that. I think Trinetta is probably more of an expert. But hi. So it's my favorite JRPG.
Your favorite JRPG
Yeah.
and the first one you ever played.
Okay. My favorite is Final Fantasy IX. I play it every single year. And the first one I ever played was probably Chrono Cross, because my dad was, or my mom was dating this guy, and he left his PlayStation at her house and never came back.
As one
Wow.
does.
That's a
Thanks,
win.
Joe.
We did it, Joe.
Yeah. Well, next up, I can't think of a better fit for this panel than this participant. She's played just about every JRPG to have ever been released, apparently, except A Witch's Tale. And she has a recommendation for whatever your tastes. Hebe Buffet, what's good?
Hello, everybody. My name's Hebe Buffet. I am a variety streamer that specializes in horror games and JRPGs. And my favorite JRPG would happen to be Legend of Legaia for the PlayStation 1. It does a lot of things that even JRPGs nowadays do not do. Like in battle, when you change your gear, it appears on the characters.
Oh,
instead of it just being a flat character design throughout the whole thing. And it has a very interesting directional turn-based, like almost like a fighting game system, even though it's turn-based. Like you input combos in advance, and it's so cool. And then my first JRPG was actually Super Mario RPG for the Super Nintendo. I never had Super Nintendo. My mother's friend would babysit me, and she had a Super Nintendo, and like somehow the game was there, and it really pulled me in with like the whimsical writing and the turn-based like action and just the cute little animations and all that. And I was like, games had never been like that for me before. Like I was used to like boing or like, so just getting to do that was something different.
Oh,
And
I absolutely get where you're coming from with that one. Finally, she's the queen of the old ways, intimately familiar with everything retro. This guest excels in providing you with the original analog experience in our digital age. Were you aware it's Queen Pib?
Good evening. How you doing? Whatever freaking time of day it is. I'm Queen Pib. Favorite JRPG? Look, if you tell me I can only play one for the rest of my life, it's gonna be Chrono Trigger, the original. I'm sorry, the soundtrack is bangers, the story is fantastic, and it's just a lot of times also if you're not quite sure what you're doing, just keep mashing the attack button until you win. But just great time traveling adventure, timeless. Square, do some more stuff with that, please. And in terms of the first JRPG, all the way back to the classic, the original Dragon Warrior for the Nintendo. I go way
wow.
back. Just back in the days when, yeah, you could maybe make your characters 6 or 7 characters long, but it only showed the first 4 up there, so your name was always ruined no matter what. And it turned out that whatever name you put in affected your stats. So if you gave yourself a stupid name, start of the game wasn't very nice to you, apparently.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for your introductions. Finally, I am Crazy Grimshaw, as you can see on stream. I am the Audacity from Down Under, as my close friend calls me. I'm a variety streamer with a focus on JRPGs, both old and new, and I particularly love any kind of JRPG that blends like a little bit of camp horror into it as well, you know, a little callback to Hebe's point. And as you can see, I'm also an
Just take my wig
accomplished
off.
hair and makeup artist. Yeah, no, snatch it now. Come on. All right. My favorite JRPG, okay, my first JRPG was Final Fantasy X for the PlayStation 2. My dad got a PlayStation 2 shortly after they came out in Australia, and it came with Final Fantasy X. Otherwise, we never would have picked it up. I know that's kind of a trite
I'm
introduction.
so old.
But I'm going to stay very squarely in that same lane. My favorite JRPG, and I think the greatest JRPG ever made, the perfect encapsulation of the genre, is Final Fantasy X-2. It is incredible, and I'm sure I will have plenty more to say about it before we end today.
It was ahead of its time.
It
was
was
a
ahead
good
of its
time.
time. It's ahead of
Yeah.
this time. Like, anyway, I have to move on from that, or that'll be the entire panel.
I mean,
Okay,
we could
so
do the entire panel with Final Fantasy X too if you want. We can do
That
that.
could be next
oh,
year.
okay, like let's pivot then. Can we get the graphics updated and we'll just go into that. Okay, for the audience, if you are joining us from a previous panel and you're maybe not familiar with what a JRPG is, obviously you've just heard some examples from each of us, but JRPG is an abbreviation of Japanese role-playing game. So they're role-playing games, they're made in Japan usually, they do what they say on the tin, right? Once upon a time, this would have been enough to encapsulate every game in the genre. These days, it's not quite that simple, unfortunately. Generally, you can probably think of a JRPG as a story-based role-playing game. Usually, it has a relatively anime-inspired aesthetic, and its core gameplay will rely on you and usually a ragtag party of characters hitting the enemy, watching some numbers pop up to represent your damage so that you can level up and ultimately watch bigger numbers pop up when you do more damage. This is a very vague description, but some more well-known JRPG franchises that you might be familiar with include Final Fantasy, Persona, Dragon Quest, and Kara alluded to this before, and although this might be a little controversial to some people, Pokemon.
I don't think that's controversial.
Well, I mean, we can talk about that for a
It's
minute
a
if you
literal
want.
party-based, turn-based
It
RPG.
is in every like definition,
Japan.
by every sense, Pokemon is a JRPG, right? But a lot of Pokemon purists don't want you to call it that.
Well, the original
Why do we listen to
Dragon
them?
Quest, the original Dragon Quest featured creatable characters, and in some of them, you actually did capture enemies and use them. So I don't know what else they want them to
Yeah,
call.
and I mean, like Shin Megami Tensei is sort of like the grandfather of the monster catching franchise or genre,
Yeah.
and Pokemon spawned out of that. And so I think that's probably why I like SMT so much,
It's like a
because
whole
it
genre of JRPGs.
it scratches that same itch for me.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Just
cool.
like those
Well,
gloves.
I would call Pokemon a JRPG, so I'm glad we seem to be in unanimous agreement. Okay, so to build off what we've already like heard a little bit about, particularly from Hebe, I'd love to get an idea of our tastes. So Hebe, what makes a good JRPG for you, and what do you look for in a title?
So, what makes a good JRPG for me? I believe it has to have like one, or rather, two of three specific things. It does not need to have all three. It needs to have good music, it needs to have interesting characters, and it needs to have entertaining gameplay. or rather, music can come second. We're going to replace music with a story.
Mhm.
If I can play a game that has shitty characters and a good story and fun gameplay, I can play a game that has an story but has good characters and good gameplay. So like generally, as long as it has two of those three things, I'm all over it. I like to have a little melodrama. My specific niche of JRPG though would probably be anything involving song magic.
Okay.
Like songs as
Okay.
attacks. Like I don't know why that's my thing.
Is Bard your favorite character class then?
I do play a bard in Final Fantasy 14.
Could have seen that one coming, I guess. Pip, same question. What do you think makes a good JRPG? What do you look for?
Well, for me, again, my tastes go back to the old school, so I'm a big fan of the older Final Fantasies, the older Dragon Warriors / Dragon Quests. Now, you can have your more complex JRPGs, and especially when you get into the strategy and tactical ones, it starts getting very confusing very quickly. But the true hallmark for me is that the core gameplay loop has to start out simple. It can't stay simple, but it's got to start out real simple. Whack the enemy, cast a spell, whatever, and then you gradually got to make it more complex as it goes on. You can't just hand me the 400-page instruction manual and say there's going to be a test on this later. Starts out simple, becomes more complex later. Like I know Final Fantasy Tactics starts out like that too, where it's all the simple classes, and by the end you're mashing the calculator class with a dancing class and nuking everybody with a push of a button. So it starts out simple, then becomes more complex as the game goes on. And then, story and all that fun stuff too. But the core gameplay loop has to be there.
Oh, that is, you've hit the nail on the head in terms of like what I look for as well, is that the gameplay, I can take or leave an average story, average characters, and I can even forgive average music. But every JRPG that like stands out to me is one that has a really enjoyable gameplay loop and really enjoyable systems. Like when you talked about it starting easy and simple and getting complex by the end, the one I immediately think of is Final Fantasy VIII, personally, which I only played for the first time this year. But once you delve fully into the junction system, it was amazing.
Wild.
It gave me everything I wanted. Chalora, what about you? What do you like? What do you look for?
I think everybody else kind of definitely, like, like you said, it hit the nail on the head. But like along with those things, I think if the gameplay is rewarding in like you learning the combat structure, like that definitely is something that I need and I look for. Like if we compare Bravely Default with Bravely Default 2, for example, I don't know if everybody's played that, but I'm gonna just try my best with this one. But like Bravely Default, like you get to the end, you get these like advanced classes, you get to mix and match your classes. There's definitely more tactic to go with those things as the game gets harder, and it feels good, and like the graphics look good, and it just feels good and natural and enjoyable. But in terms of Bravely Default 2, you get these new classes, or even Bravely Second for some of them. The classes are not even as good as the originals from the Bravely Default. They're not rewarding in that like you learn all these abilities and then you're still kind of like not even that strong, and it doesn't really do much for you, or like doesn't do much for the combat, and so you still have difficulty progressing through the game anyway. So it just doesn't, like, what's the purpose? Besides that, I need really good character writing. If the characters aren't like characters that I can identify with, or that are complex in terms of their strengths, vulnerabilities, and weaknesses, what are they there for? They could be anybody. It could be a potato with no face and a soul.
I think that character exists in one of the Breath of Fire games.
And I'm sure they're better than some of the characters we know.
Kara, what about you? What do you like from a JRPG? What do you want?
So for me, like music is a big part of it, obviously. Not to sound shallow, but I'm very into the aesthetics. So like if the costume, the clothing, like all of that has to be good. Like if everyone looks ugly or plain, I'm not interested.
Wow, Kara.
I want the big collars. I want the extravagance. I want the ridiculousness of it. Like I want like the main party and the main villains to look very clearly like the main characters of the story, and then all the regular non-speaking townspeople, they can look plain. But the rest of them, like, I want them to be elevated. And I think, like, for me, like, that's a big thing. Trying to think what else. For me, like, obviously music too, with everything I love with that. Gameplay is a big part too for me, but I can forgive a really easy, mediocre gameplay storyline. Like, I love A Witch's Tale. I play it every couple of years around Halloween time because it has that kind of like anime Tim Burton thing that as a kid I was really drawn to. But it is one of the easiest JRPGs you will ever play because it starts off pretty difficult because everything will kill you in like 1 or 2 turns. But as you level up, your magic gets stronger, but it doesn't cost more points to use.
Mhm.
So you're doing like one-shot kill spells, but using like 6 MP out of like a bank of like 30,000. So like you can just like steamroll the way through the game. But I also think that like I really like when JRPGs do something that kind of like twists the convention of things on its head a little bit,
Mm.
like Bravely Default, like having to reset and do the same thing over and over and over again until you finally get something a little bit different. That's like, oh, this is, well, there goes my headphone. Until you get something that's, you know,
Just
a little
reset
more
it.
interesting. Exactly. Just like Bravely Default. But SMT4 does that a lot for me with like flipping convention on its head, especially within Shin Megami Tensei as a series.
Cool. Well, you touched on something there that segues very nicely into what I was going to ask next, which is the grandiose, I would say genuinely camp character designs of many JRPG characters. And the point you made about townspeople can look normal, you can always tell when a character's important to a JRPG if their design is exuberant
spunky,
compared
hair.
to everyone that they're around, right? So in that lane, JRPGs seem to be a genre that a lot of LGBTQIA plus people discovered in their childhood and still hold a deep love of. For some of us, these characters and stories in these titles spoke to us in a way that other video games didn't or other media didn't. I remember as a kid, I'll bring it up again, I would restart Final Fantasy X-2 over and over again just to watch the real emotion, like pop concert dance number, opening cutscene that's interspersed with like Charlie's Angels style girl boss fist fighting. It was everything to me as a kid. Like, it was amazing. I'd never seen anything like it. I discovered many years later into my adulthood that this wasn't an experience that was unique to me. Many different LGBT people, gay men, did this. And it may have been a sign that one day I would be dressing up as a lady on the internet. So there you go. But from each of you, I want to hear, Chalora, why do you think the genre appeals to the queer community? And did you have any experiences of these type of games offering insight into your own identity?
Oh gosh. I had to go first, eh?
I can come back to you if you want a moment.
No, it's okay. My like whole queer experience with like gaming and like how it like reflected to me wasn't necessarily through queerness, but just sort of like mutual experience. Like the reason that Final Fantasy IX resonated so hard with me was like, and I mean it's spoilers, but like the game is like 20 years old.
Yeah. If you don't want to hear Final Fantasy IX spoilers, just block your ears for like the next 30 seconds.
Just leave the internet. I don't know.
Yeah, to be honest.
But you know, I resonated a lot with Garnet at the time that I was playing it. You know, I started playing it when I was really young, all the way up until like I was a teenager until I finally beat it when I was like 16 or 17. I was not very good at games. But like Garnet loses her mom in sort of like psychological way, and then literally.
I was gonna say a fake dragon accident.
Yeah. But from my perspective, like I did lose a mom when I lost my grandmother because my mom was, you know, doing her own thing and being a single mom and whatever. And then I lost my mom again when I came out as queer. And she was angry and like didn't want to like have a good relationship with me. So it just sort of hit a lot harder in that way. And on top of it being like she's like a kick-ass woman, like, and not realizing that I was a woman at the time, you know, I feel like it's just come full circle, like through my whole life. And I don't know, like I know that kind of probably sounds like an exaggeration, but that's just how I see it anyway. And
No, I think that's
we can find
amazing.
queerness and those kind of relations, even though Garnet isn't a queer character. We can find those kind of similarities in a different way.
Well, she goes
Yeah.
through a transformation and changes her
Yeah.
name at some point,
Yeah.
doesn't she?
Yeah.
Like the game
Yes.
literally does not let you use the dead name in this situation. I
Yeah.
tried using it for a yuck and it said no, you got to pick a different name.
I think they changed that in the Steam release, so
I
you
call it
can
on
dead
it.
name Dagger to your heart's content in 2022, apparently. Anyway, thank you for that, Chilora. Thank you for sharing that. Hebe, same question. Did you have any personal experiences with JRPGs in your own queerness? And why do you think the genre appeals to queer people?
So I can't particularly say that I had any personal experiences with JRPGs in terms of my own queerness. I think simply because JRPGs were like the only genre I played. So like I was just so fully immersed. I was fully reimbursed. And to me, I just thought like a lot of it was normal, but turns out I had mental illness.
Well, we've all been there.
I think it appeals mainly, at least for me, it's very escapist. It's these big fantastical worlds where like it's like I would just lose myself in them. It was different from the day to day. I would go home from school where I was bullied all day and called a gamer word, and just like basically I would sit, the weekend would start, I'd boot up, say, Legend of Legaia or like dot hack, and I would just play for hours on end in an entirely different world in an entirely different character's skin, and it made me feel comfortable. It was these big fantastic things that you don't see every day. So not only was I getting the comfort from not having to deal with the real life, I was also getting this whimsy and fun in front of me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cam.
Of course.
Kara, same question to you. JRPGs and queerness.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of in a similar note as Hebe, it was a big escapism thing for me growing up because like I didn't really dive deep into JRPGs until I was like 12 or 13. Which I feel like that's like the good age to get in because you can like really start understanding the stories and stuff. And I just remember like that was also like kind of the apex of a lot of like my mental health struggles and growing up not realizing you're queer, growing up religious and being queer, and all of that kind of coming to a head at the same time. And so for me, JRPGs were like the most outside of reality that I could get with a game. And so they would be what I would go to. So I would play a lot of like really kind of weird ones that were like not even necessarily like traditional JRPGs, but had JRPG elements. So like things like The Last Story, I remember playing a ton of the first Xenoblade. Obviously, Pokemon is like a big comfort series for me. SMT, as I started getting into that as I got a little older, like gotten towards like end of high school into college. So it was more so of like I didn't necessarily find myself in the games, but I found like the things that I appreciated the most in media in games or in those games. So I was like, let's keep going with this because I want to analyze these. I want to get into the plots. I want to see the existential crises that these characters are going through and how interesting they were to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely relate to that because there's not necessarily a lot of like openly queer characters in the genre. But there's definitely like relatable experiences in that sense, and a lot of things that appeal in, like, as I said earlier, their grandiosity. A lot of things that I liked to see in media were present in JRPGs when I was growing up. Pip, what about you?
Sorry. A lot of times, still to this day, if a character is queer or gay in a JRPG, it's brought up as a joke.
Yeah.
Like Enchanted Arms for the 360 and PS3. I
Yeah.
just remember that character, like every review, just the gay character up front. Oh, listen to his voice, all that. Just
Looking
personal
at you,
out,
X
like,
Play.
yep.
Well, you look at Sylvando in Dragon
Yeah,
Quest
that's what I
11,
was gonna say too.
who is like hinted at being gay, but is not ever outright confirmed. But his entire character is as likable as he is. He's a caricature. He's a joke. No offense, caricature. But he is a joke. He's a dancer. He travels around with a band of flamboyant young men. He's
He uses whips.
and he uses whips. Yeah. His one of his weapons available is whips. So there's not necessarily great representation within the games themselves, but that doesn't mean that we can't project onto them, of course. Pip, what about you?
Well, on top of the occasional camp that you get in some of these games, it's that so many of these games they're all about a spirit of rebellion. Like, I mean, there's very few video games where you wake up and it's like, okay, I'm going to subjugate the heck out of everyone here today. It's always people fighting not only necessarily to save the world, but to protect their own existence. And I mean, theme doesn't really have to be explained much beyond that. It's people who just want to exist and not be oppressed by a tyrannical government or some kind of mystical fog or entropy or that
Or
weird,
religion.
that weird lava thing
Hmm.
that's going to show up at the year 2000, stuff like that. In
Yeah,
terms of like a character or something that spoke to me. Now we're gonna go back to Final Fantasy IX for a second here. I haven't played a whole lot of it, but of course we all remember Guja. Now back in the day, now look, I would have been like 13, 14 at the time. This would have been like, the late 90s, early aughts. Stereotypical person back then might have looked at it and gone, oh, what's the gamer word up with that? I had a different viewpoint when I saw them. I was like, hang on a second. This alpha dude, so badass, they raided the fabulous side of the armor store and said, come get me, bro. So I saw that. It's like my brain reacted in a different way, and that should have been a sign right there.
I think there may have been signs that all of us missed in our adolescence, but that's okay.
Oh yeah.
Well, if I look kind of forward from our experiences now, and we talk a little bit about, I suppose, the present, it's no secret that there's big money in video games these days. I think within each of our lifetimes and most of the lifetimes of people watching at home, we've seen video games go from a relatively niche pursuit into the most profitable form of media on earth, frankly. So not only have games suddenly become worth a lot of money, technological advances and consumer expectations have made games more expensive to develop than they ever have been before. Hebe, how do you think that these trends have impacted the genre?
I think they have impacted the genre in a negative manner. Back during the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era, hell, even back as far as the Super Nintendo era, there was so more JRPGs than you could shake a friggin' boot at.
Yeah.
And it's like once the PS3 era hit and the Xbox 360 kind of flopped, and all that was left to produce for was the cell architecture, which was extremely difficult to produce for and extremely expensive. You notice the amount of JRPGs that came out started dwindling down. And part of that is because as we move forward to today, a AA RPG release does not exist anymore.
Yep.
Unless like you're looking at like indie like brands and like much smaller developers that are not doing wide physical releases. Like back during the PS2 era, you would have your Art and Elicos, you'd have your Radiata Stories, you'd have your Grim Grimoires, and you can't really come out with games like that anymore just because it is so damn expensive to animate and rig in 4K HD. It's like that's the reason why we don't see any real 2D games anymore. That's the reason why anime isn't actually animated anymore physically. It costs too much money. Everything is 3D rigged. And To me, frankly, I think it's bullshit.
I think you make some great points there, and I'm going to come to this question like properly down the track a little bit, but you alluded to it already, so I'm going to throw it in there for you at the same time. What do you think was the golden age of the JRPG?
Oh, absolutely the PS2. I feel like I had the most JRPGs for the PS2. On top of that, we are paying $70 for games now. I don't need a JRPG as much as I love a 100-hour, 90-hour JRPG. I don't need it to be that long, but I would like my game to be at least 40 hours. And there's a lot of RPGs coming out now that barely break 20. And it's just like, I just paid $30 more than I would have paid for a PlayStation 2 game that would have lasted me until the cows came home. I don't know if that answered the question.
I'm from Australia, so video games here have always been
cost that, yeah.
So I can't talk to that. But I can say it's interesting that you say you look for a game to be 40 hours, because these days I want a game to be 15 hours so that I can fit it into a handful of streams and move on. Like, but shorter. Let's keep it short and sweet. I
feel like games are developed that way on purpose now to get them out, and then okay, you consume this. Now here's another one.
Yes,
they're not main feature experiences anymore.
Yeah. No,
it's something to hold you over until the next big release.
Yeah. Well, you have some fantastic insight on that. Kara, what about you? How do you think that like the way the video game industry has shifted is impacting the genre? And I suppose as well, do you think there was a golden age of JRPGs?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it was I would say like the mid 2000s would be like my golden era of JRPGs, like 2005, 2006-ish to like maybe into the late 2000s. I think there's just a lot of like really good gems in there. But also I think in terms of like game industry trends, I think JRPGs, because they are a lot more expensive to make, they have to be a lot more broad in appeal. And so you don't have these like really niche, like really specific, weird, oddball JRPGs that are like really heavily stylized, really heavy thematic content, and like really hyper specific. And I really miss that era of JRPGs because they were so like, you knew exactly what you were getting out of it. And it was like, you had to really buy into what they were selling going in. Whereas now it's like all of the bigger JRPGs, it's kind of the same stuff we've already seen recycled, but it's done in a way that like new people who don't play JRPGs can jump in, which is great. I love having more JRPG people in the world that I can nerd out about this stuff with. But like, when I look at things like, as much as I love Persona 5, and when I look at things like Persona 5 and I compare them to like earlier SMT titles and earlier Persona games, there's a very clear shift in what the consumers were getting into. And it's less about, you know, the story and the world and the traditional JRPG stuff. And it's more about the casual things you can do and the side content and the character relationship building, which is interesting. But I miss that era of the world's gone to heck and what are we going to do to fix it versus who am I going to go on a date with on Thursday night, you know?
Well, you brought up the shift from Persona compared to the old Shin Megami Tensei games. They used to be, look, I have to admit, I haven't played the Shin Megami Tensei series, but I feel it has a reputation for being particularly difficult, right? The old
they're
SMT
brutal.
games.
They are brutal. I would say like SMT4, as much as I love SMT4, is frustratingly difficult at times. And they punish you for not playing the game well. Like there's a whole mechanic of it where if you die, and it's not like, and it's the old way where if you die, not the rest of your party, but if you die, it's game over. And
Final Fantasy 13. Yep.
And so it's like, if you're dead, then it's over, but you can pay to get revived. So you can use your in-game currency to revive yourself before you went into that fight. But it gets more expensive every time you die.
Too real.
And so if you don't have enough money, you can say like, well, I've paid my debt, whatever, and the person who deals with all of that will be like, okay, I'm gonna say like you owe me this much money when you get it. And so you can get revived, but then the second you earn that amount of money, it is all gone and you are wiped out to zero. And you have to start it all over again. And in a game that like that, where it's very grind heavy, and even when you're level 80 something, you can still die within 1 or 2 turns. It's punishing.
Look, I can't say I'm that disappointed that we moved away from frustratingly difficult titles in modernity, but that's okay. Pib, I want your opinion. How do you think the industry is affecting games? What do you think the golden age was?
Well, in terms of, I mean, a lot of people have made the same point that gaming development is full of bloat. The graphics and the music and everything has to be polished to a mirror sheen. It just, they've all worked themselves into a tizzy and convinced themselves that there's no market for simplicity anymore. When we've seen scaled down releases like Octopath and Bravely Default and a handful of others show that there is still a market for this stuff. So a lot of it is them just doing it to themselves. In terms of a golden age, for me, in all of gaming, the golden age is the 5th generation. So your PlayStation 1, your N64, and so on. In terms of for RPGs, it starts in the 5th and it ends a little way into the 7th. So PlayStation 1 era set the table. PlayStation 2 put everything on there. And then PlayStation 3 and related consoles started out okay because, you know, they hadn't really ratcheted up development yet with DLC and such on and so forth. But once the gen went on longer and longer, it you can see a lot of the trappings of the modern day industry started to really bake in towards the end of there. Like all I have to say is you used to get a Final Fantasy game every other year. Now we're on like what, 6 between mainline releases now, something like that.
You make such a good point there too, and I completely agree with you that PS1 through early PS3 age for me was like when we were getting the best of the best. But you make such a good point there, and I think that part of the reason why the early PS3 games were, or I would also consider still part of that golden age, was a lot of stuff was like things that started life as a PS2 title and then ended life as a PS3 release. So they were hangovers from like an era where those, like, I want to say like traditional JRPG values, but I don't think that's right. But
Not traditional JRPG values.
That's what we
I'm
stand
here
for
for
at
the
Stream
original
Queens. At Stream
JRPG
Queens, we
value.
love traditional JRPG values. Okay.
Well, it's not unheard of in game development for something to start on one console and then end up on another. So it's there is occasional layover when you go from one gen to the next.
Oh, the early development footage of Final Fantasy 13, where it's all reused Final Fantasy 12 and Final Fantasy 10 assets. I love it. Make that into a game. What happened to that? Come on, bring it back. Chalora, what do you think? Where's the industry pushing JRPGs? How do you think that it's impacting them? And what's the best era?
For the era, I would have to agree with Pib 100%. In terms of like what's going on right now, I feel like, you know, at its peak, we had enough stories, or sometimes too many stories, that we could really flesh everything out and be super, like, not us, but like the developers and things like that could be really creative. And these days I find we are so pushed on getting stuff out as quickly as possible and as many of them as out as possible that we are picking at creative crumbs. Like there is nothing to do anymore. All of these things are completely unoriginal, uninspired, and people are going to hate me for saying stuff like this about like new RPGs, but it's true. Like if you look at what we had versus what we have now, like, and I'm not saying like I hate RPGs today. Like I still love them, I'll play them, whatever. But to compare to what we had before, you know, a game would come out like Final Fantasy X, for example, and we'd get voice acting, which I don't know where that went, and all this other stuff. And we were like, wow. And I mean, like, it was not special voice acting, but it was at least decent.
It was new.
It was new, and it wasn't terrible. It wasn't like hello, my name is so and so. I love.
I think
shooting
that's what Yuna
fireballs."
sounded like.
But like, I don't know.
Um,
It at least had some personality. But I just think that like it's an unfortunate comparison that like I feel like a lot of millennials end up making, and then other like younger people get mad. But like if you look at, you know, the AAA titles and the like more like indie or smaller development titles like Dark Cloud and Final Fantasy back then, for example, they're still enjoyable today. They're still good. We like the
Yeah.
characters, we like the story, we like the combat, we like the gameplay, we like the music. We're still listening to it. But some of these titles today are just so drab. And like
Yeah.
like I know like there are some people who love Final Fantasy 15 and like that's fine, but like
I enjoyed it.
listen,
Okay.
for me,
Could someone disconnect Hebe from the panel? I think we've heard enough.
I try to view the good in everything rather than the negative.
as an
It
example,
was
I know
fun.
people are gonna hate it, but like it's for cis het white men driving around in a huge, almost empty world. And like, I don't know, at the very beginning of the game, Noctis's dad dies. And he goes, oh, okay, so where are we going next? He
Because you had to
doesn't
watch the
cry.
movie.
At least they were listening to Florence and the Machine on that road trip. Like,
At least
there's
there was
one
that.
redeeming characteristic there.
So I think that like the writing and the creativity is just, they're picking at, there's nothing left. And they need to produce faster than they can create, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So we're just sort of like all the marketing team is like, okay, well, what's marketable? Okay, make something like that. And it's like we don't want something marketable. We want something good.
Mhm.
Well,
It's like it's
and
a lot of the same brainworms that have infected modern gaming development these days, where everything like we as a society reached peak video game, like I don't know, Assassin's Creed 2 something or other, where now every game is just an open world something or other with
Yeah.
very little UIs and just yeah,
Close
oh
the
yeah, you
world.
got to run everywhere. And I can see where there can be a lot of complaints made where just it's all kind of turning into one amorphous blob. If you're not an online shooter or a scaled down indie game, you're an open world something. And I can see complaints levied against Final Fantasy 15 in that regard.
and
And
part of it, I feel like Japan particularly has an issue. Not every big game JRPG release needs to be a multimedia project. I understand that this is rich coming from somebody who's one of their favorite RPGs is Dot Hack, where there was anime, manga, this, that, snack machines. Like, I get it. I get the irony. But I don't need a movie, a book, an anime that's not even going to be referenced. Like, it's no,
Yeah.
put your money into the game.
I think
And they have
we are
money.
getting past that a little bit too now. I think maybe we're coming out the other side of that now, and that was like a last generation affliction mostly, or at least from as far as I can tell.
Status ailment.
Well, we talked a little bit about how things like graphic enhancements and stuff are making JRPGs more expensive to develop, which leads to a whole host of ailments, unfortunately. But I would like to pivot to talking about gameplay a little bit. JRPGs are an interesting genre in that they were designed originally to offer like the experience of a tense and epic battle in the same way that something like Dungeons and Dragons would, in an age where technology couldn't support massive speed and scale like modern consoles can. In modernity, I think this has left the genre in an interesting spot that not a whole lot of genres have to contend with. Some franchises, some JRPG franchises, will cling staunchly to their roots and try and deliver exactly the same type of game they always have, like the Dragon Quest franchise. And they don't feel the need to reinvent themselves particularly. Others are trialing new systems with seemingly every entry. And you look at the Final Fantasy series that we just talked about. Last time they tried open world. The time before that, they tried the most, in 13, I'm talking about, the most closed world you've ever seen in a video game ever. And they're trying to figure out what sticks with each different change of battle system and things like that. Pib, do you think developers should stick to their formula that works for them and what they are known for? or do you think that taking risks is better, even if they don't always pay off?
Well, I don't mind the idea of some of them taking risks, but some of them have to realize that the reason why some of these nameplates have longevity is because they have created these established, whatever you want to call it, gameplay memes, metrics that they're measured by.
Yeah.
I would be more a fan of incremental change. There's a saying, don't try to be happier than happy. If what you're doing is working for you, keep at it. You're doing a great job. But if you're I don't know, if something's not doing right, if the creative team's not feeling it, sure, throw the whole thing out the window like it seems Final Fantasy does all the time. But for me, I mean, Final Fantasy feels like the one franchise that can get away with it because it's the brand generic. But like every other one, it's like if they were constantly reinventing the wheel every single time, you just wouldn't be able to get into a groove with it. So I'm more of a fan of the incremental change method.
Yeah. Okay. Kara, what do you think? Is tradition best, or is taking risks better?
I like when there's a bit of both, not to be a centrist, but I do like when people
Whoa.
I know, controversial. But I really love when, and again, to be the SMT fan that I am, that's what I really like about like Atlas JRPGs in particular, is that they have like their typical conventions, especially with like SMT. You can always count on like the same enemies kind of being in the thing, but like the conversation systems are usually fairly different between SMT, the spin-off games that aren't Persona and Persona. And like there's a wide berth of options within the Megami Tensei umbrella. And there's really something for a little bit of everybody. If you want stuff that's more character driven, if you want stuff that is more, big story focused, or like epic plot beats, stuff like that. There's a lot of variety just within the gameplay there, but there's always like that element of the turn-based combat, the elements of dungeon crawling, the kind of mythological deities being your party monsters and stuff like that, and your demons. That's all in everything, but it's always like a different spin on the formula in a little bit of a way. Like there's always a little twist with a mechanic that I really enjoy. Like SMT4 is very different from SMT5, but the gameplay beats are very similar in terms of how battles are structured and how you just handle everything.
Yeah. You brought something up in our like discussion about questions and things to talk about on this panel as well, which I think fits nicely into like what we're talking about now of tradition versus trying new things, which was representation in the JRPG genre. So you may have seen it in the news recently. There was quite a bit of controversy about one of the Final Fantasy 16 developers saying that people of color didn't fit into that world. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. I just want to hear a little bit of your thoughts around representation. And obviously, just to be clear, I am white, so I'm not going to speak out of turn on. And I would imagine our panelists fall into the same category there. But what's your gut feeling?
I mean, for me, that's what I really like about like indie options, because indie gaming and indie JRPGs, there aren't very many, but the ones that are like coming down the pipeline within the next couple of years have put a pretty good emphasis on character diversity, whether it's through skin tone, gender representation, whatever, which I really appreciate, because I'm tired of playing a bunch of milk toast white characters, even if they're all in Japan and they're all technically Asian. Like the skin tones are the same across every single person in the party. Like I want to see diversity in the skin tone ranges and the representation there, and I don't want it to be a token. Like I don't want it to be like oh, here's the black guy. Like I don't want it to be
SARS.
Yep. Yes.
Barrett.
So that's kind of my thing, and I just want developers to be better about stuff like that. And I think that's where what's exciting about independent studios that are taking the JRPG formula and trying different things with it is that they're not afraid to make those choices, whereas a lot of established developers clearly are.
Yeah, and I think too, obviously, like with many JRPGs coming out of the same handful of studios in Japan, you get a very homogenized development team, whereas independent titles give people who are like from marginalized communities in whatever way the chance to represent themselves the way that they want to be represented. And so the point about indies, I think, is great for that, because that's really like, I think independent game development is a lot of what the future of video games will be, or at least the creativity in video games that Chalora mentioned was lacking in JRPGs these days. Hebe, when I brought this up, you had a strong reaction to it. What are your thoughts?
It's what makes me sad about it is the person who said it is a Naoki Yoshida, Yoshi P, and he is the main director for Final Fantasy 14, and he brought Final Fantasy 14 from a failure to probably the biggest moneymaker Square Enix currently has. And that's the reason they gave him 16. And to hear him say, well, this is specifically based on this, so this can't happen. It's a fantasy game. It doesn't matter. You're making up races. You're making up... I can go fight the big booby ice lady, but I can't have more than one black person at a time.
Yeah, no.
It doesn't make sense.
Conversely,
Your person can have bunny ears, but they can't have a dark skin tone as well.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, to move away from that, representation matters. And I think Japan has a big issue with that. Yeah. Japan, even, and this is going to be slightly off topic, even in anime, unless the show is explicitly billed as being yaoi or yuri, it, like Symphogear, for example, there's two characters, their names are Hibiki and Miku. Over the 5 seasons, it is very blatant that they are girlfriends. However, they do not kiss ever. They only ever hold hands, and it's only ever inferred. JRPGs do the same shit. Persona 4 is probably the most egregious example I can think of.
Yeah.
In that, two characters, not just one, two, Kanji and Naoto. Naoto has a trans panic that results in her realizing, no, I am mass cisgender, which does happen. Everybody's journey is valid. Kanji has a gay panic that results in him being like, nah, I'm straight. It turns out the person I was crushing on is a woman, is a cis woman, and it's all cool. But on top of that, the narrative itself, with what it was trying to hammer in, doesn't fit with the direction the story went.
Yep.
Yeah.
Chie's whole thing was that she keeps getting in Yukiko's way, and that she's like domineering. Yukiko's whole thing was that she's trapped, but it turns out she's not actually trapped. She can do what she wants. She has to figure out what she wants. Kanji's he was afraid of being gay because he liked
to sew.
Like to sew and like soft things. And rather than accepting, you know what, maybe I am a big gamer word, it's like, oh, sorry guys, I'm straight. But and it's just it's very ham-fisted.
I think ham-fisted is a good word for a lot of the way that like representation of any kind is approached in JRPGs. Pib, you had something to say?
Well, I was going to add on to the outrage that, you know, we can't. It's like, okay, you've contrived this faux European setting, and supposedly there were no people of color there, which is not actually true in historical stuff. But it's like, okay, are we going to go the rest of the way? Is everyone going to die of rickets at the age 35? Is the entire royal family going to be inbred?
Japanese people don't age past 35 in media.
Oh yeah, you're right. Good point.
I think that'd be an interesting end to Final Fantasy 16 if Clive just dies of rickets. Like
the mysterious Japanese cold.
It'd get people talking,
but to get back to it, yeah, I mean, representation is important here. I'm pulling a zinger out here. I didn't think I was going to use this line today. So y'all remember Jesus, right? Kind of a famous dude here. You know, they had to make him white so the white people would like him, right?
Yep.
If that doesn't tell you that people like representation, I don't know what the heck will. I really don't. They had to change the guy so that, you know, the white people would like it. So you can't turn around and tell me that other people aren't allowed to complain and go, I'd like to see myself in media. I'd really like to see it. Just
I
a
think
thought.
I think great points from each of you. We are getting down to our last 5 minutes of our allotted time, so I am going to move into our closing arguments in support of JRPGs.
I have to get my piece.
Oh, sorry, Chulora, please, by all means, if you've got something to say, go for it.
Ready.
Interrupt me.
I was like, I'm gonna talk about Fire Emblem. We're gonna talk about Fire Emblem.
Go, go, go.
Do it.
Tell me
Do
about
it.
it.
Well, Fire Emblem has like almost no black people. And like you were saying, like, should they stick to the script or should they, get creative or like, change it up? Fire Emblem hasn't really changed it up. The only thing they changed up is like this whole like dating system, which personally, as a longtime Fire Emblem player, I find irritating because I'm here for the strategy and the gameplay, not the dating sim. The dating sim's convenient and it's kind of fun and quirky and fun and whatever and campy, but then the writing for that isn't even that great, in my opinion. It's not that deep. So you think if they wanted to make that an important part, they should make it deeper. But above all, the thing that they haven't really done anything about is having more queer characters other than just one. And I don't want to argue about having one or two. It's one. And they have almost no people of color, if any, sometimes. And we have indie versions of Fire Emblem coming out now that at least have more. They're offering us more. And those competitors are going to become more interesting, in my opinion, for the gameplay style that we're looking for because they have better representation. So if they fail to look out for those types of things, then those are the types of changes I think they definitely need to work on, but stick to the same gameplay style.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm glad that you got that in. I also think it's a great point that we don't need a dating sim shoehorned into every single release. I support that wholeheartedly. Okay. Just before we finish up for the day, I'll go around to each of you, and if you'd like to, if you've got anything to plug, now's the time. But I would also love to know, can you recommend a JRPG that you think that everyone should play if they haven't already? Chulora, I'll start with you.
No, I didn't. Oh,
well, think about it while you plug your channel.
You can find me on twitch.tv/Tlora. You can also find me on YouTube /@Tlora. I'm doing a lot of videos over there right now, all the time on every Tuesday and Thursday. And a JRPG that I think everyone should play. Oh God.
You can have a minute if you want. I can come back to you.
Well, I mean, speaking of a Fire Emblem with better representation, right now I'm playing Lost Eidolons. I'm not finished yet, but it at least has several people of color of different skin tones other than just one very pale person. And it has queerness, which I asked. But they're an indie studio, so they're still like working on it.
That ticks a lot of boxes for me. Hebe, what about you? Where can we find you? What should we play?
You can find me at twitch.tv/HebeBuffet. You can also find me on YouTube at youtube.com/@HebeBuffet. You can also find me anywhere under Hebe Buffet. Please follow me on TikTok. They will not let me go live unless I have 1,000 followers. And in terms of games that a game that I would recommend wholeheartedly, I did say Legend of Legaia was my favorite. I love going back to that and replaying it. It's so much fun. I also would highly recommend Tales of Symphonia. It starts off very Final Fantasy X, and what I like about the Tales series is that it embraces the tropes, but in a way that is written. You're not necessarily playing Tales games for the plot. You're playing it for the way the characters view the plot.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. We've got 1 minute left. Kara, same point. Plug yourself. Tell us to play something.
Yes, you can all follow me at twitch.tv/caricature. I mostly do Pokemon. I do a lot of art. Let me motor mouth my way through this. If I have to pick, I would say Tales of the Abyss is probably mine. And then also Shin Megami Tensei 4. But also check out Demon School coming out this next year. It is a tactics-styled Persona-inspired game with a very diverse cast of characters. And it takes a lot of influences from Italian horror from the 60s and 70s.
That was Demon School?
Yes.
All right, we'll keep an eye out. And Pib.
I'm at twitch.tv/QueenPib. There's links to other places once you get there. My RPG recommend, I'm not going to throw one of these old school grandpa, please go to bed titles. I recommend Yakuza Like a Dragon. Does a really good job of changing the Yakuza franchise from a single character based beat 'em up to a party based, turn based game. Does a very good job. Highly recommend.
Awesome. All right. Very quickly, I'm Crazy Grimshaw. You can follow all of us by clicking that little green heart that's on screen if you hover over the player right now. I would obviously recommend Final Fantasy X too. It goes without saying. But just to wrap up, thank you so much to the panelists who have joined me today. I think I said it already, but I can't think of 4 Stream Queen siblings I would have been happier to have here with me. This is perfect. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much to Stream Queen's management who have put this all together for us this weekend, and our volunteer mod team in the chat today as well. Don't forget, we are raising money for AMFAR. That link is still in the chat, so if you are able to donate, that is an absolutely fantastic cause. Stick around. After any more content, coming up next is the Drag Partner Showcase. And remember, the con is all weekend long, so stay tuned for more Kings, Queens, characters, and creatures. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.